what is this H-1B 100K proposal?
It definitely is going to have an impact in a lot of ways.
Suddenly, there's this air of fear.
This new fee, that's going to be a major issue.
They're on their OPT or STEM OPT, and
Right.
they're inside the US. So does that fee apply to them?
You've got an uphill battle now.
There's still no way for anyone to pay the 100K H-1B fee.
Well, another option is marry a US citizen.
What can international professionals do now to future-proof careers against all these shifting policies?
My heart goes out to you for whatever changes this, means for you. People need to be doing whatever they can to.
As of today, nothing is in action. It's still the old system, but
The administration making it very clear about what their priorities are. What is the American dream?
everything could change.
That's right.
So the US just rewrote the rules. Anyone applying for a new H-1B visa will now face a $100,000 fee, a radical jump from the few $1,000s it used to cost. This change threatens to collapse the lottery system, reshape how companies hire, and force us all to rethink the path forward. Before we begin this podcast today, Evan, could you introduce yourself and manifest law?
Sure. So I'm Evan Law. I've worked in the immigration law field for over 17 years. I used to be an appeals officer with the USCIS, the Administrative Appeals Office. And I'm with Manifest Law. It's an incredible law firm that really has this combination of tech and this client-centered focus on immigration law. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today and talking about this issue with the H-1B proposals.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Evan. And
Sure.
I really like the scales at the back. It's going
Thanks.
to add a nice touch to the podcast.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes I think we should mail those with the some of the petitions that are filed, just in case. Balance it out, keep the balance, right?
Right, right. Perfect. So, Evan, what's happening? What is this H-1B 100K proposal?
Well, the essence of this is that the Trump administration is uh, basically honing in on what they feel like is um, an issue that's affecting U.S. workers that where there's these allegations of abuse of the H-1B system, and it's also a prioritization that they're looking at focusing on higher wage earners. And so there's been a proposal that has gone out where the government is basically saying they're adjusting or proposing to adjust the lottery system so that somebody at a higher wage level would get more lottery votes, in essence.
Okay, and how does it compare to the system that was before?
So the way it is now is just a regular, well, I say regular lottery, but there's nuances to this. And many times people go through the lottery over and over, and they're not picked, and they're not picked, and it's a very stressful situation I can imagine for a lot of people. But some of the major changes here are you've talked about the proposed fee, which would be $100,000 that the employer would need to pay for each new H-1B applicant. That's one aspect of this. And then the other overarching proposal is this aspect of giving higher priority to the individuals at a higher wage level. And so what this would mean is people that are at lower wage jobs, they would only get one registration into the lottery, so they have a much lower chance of being selected in the lottery.
Okay, so it's still a lottery, but with a bit of merit, is what
Yeah,
I'd say.
that's right.
And basically a company that can afford it.
Yeah, yeah. And so in essence, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say this will kind of balance things out in terms of attracting people at the highest wage levels. And if they do that, the government's position is that won't impact U.S. workers as much. The viewpoint now is that a lot of people are coming over on an H-1B visa and obtaining positions at lower wages than what would be paid to U.S. workers. And so that's, you know, where they're coming from with this. Time will tell how it all pans out.
Uh-huh. But is it like in action now? Like I've heard that there's still no way for anyone to pay the 100K H-1B fee.
So that's right. It hasn't been rolled out as far as how the fee needs to be paid. There are other aspects of this proposal that are in action in terms of the government has issued notice and comment rulemaking about this higher wage um, kind of target that they're proposing to give a higher priority to those higher wage earners. So that is already in process, but it will be some time before we know what's really going to happen, especially about that $100,000 fee. There is some litigation that has been started on that as well. So we'll have to be following that closely to see what happens there.
Right. To my understanding, I've heard that this is such a dynamic issue that it's changing like every day. Like I heard like someone filed like I think it was North Carolina or something where someone filed like a litigation issue like 2 days back, and there's still like every day it changes. So as of today, nothing is in action. Like it's still the old system, but there's an expectation by March, everything could change.
That's right. Initially, one of our main concerns as far as immigration attorneys helping people through this is our initial concern was for people outside the US, we thought they were not going to be allowed to come back unless they paid the $100,000 fees. Then the government put out guidance and said, no, that's not the case. Anyone on an H-1B right now, they can travel and come back and all of that. So yes, nothing is you know, set in stone at this point. We went through that period of chaos, and now the dust is settling a little bit, and yet now we still need to see how things move forward. But one thing that is kind of a normalized type of this process is this notice and comment rulemaking. That is the way that these proposed changes come about. The litigation is going to be focusing on the $100,000 fee and whether that is, whether the correct channels were taken to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. It's still uncertain, but yeah. So Evan, uh, what is the impact going to be on like startups versus like big tech? Is it going to make a difference to those hiring or like current employees?
Well, it definitely will if this $100,000 fee is deemed to be um, lawful, and for a small startup to look at if they were planning to hire several people under the H-1B program, and now all of a sudden they're looking at, $300,000 in fees to do that, it's an enormous it could have an enormous impact on them. I think one of the challenges too is when you talk about maybe the other visa types that people can transition to, that gets to be a challenging conversation because sometimes people will say, "Well, what can you tell me about the O1 visa?" And generally speaking, though, that's for people who, well, the regulations state for individuals of extraordinary ability, they have to show they've risen to the very top of their field, and so it, you know every case is just going to be dependent on what someone's background is and how qualified they are to transition towards something else. We may see people start to uh, go on for even further education that they've um, done before so that they can uh, be on a student visa or something similar. But yeah, time will tell, but it definitely is going to have an impact in a lot of ways.
So my understanding, like you just touching upon what you said on the student visa part, my understanding was that any like when the law first came out, like the first I think it was on Friday, it said that anyone who's outside the US and if they're on an H-1B or anything, they're coming back, the 100K applies to them. Then 30 hours they had like to like pretty much come back. And then
Mhm.
there was another notice that said that if they already have an H-1B from before, it doesn't apply to them. This is like for fresh applications. So what happens to like students who are in the US? Like they're either on like they are mostly on an F1 and they're on their OPT or STEM OPT
Right.
and they're inside the US. So does that fee apply to them?
Yes, and that's one of the major challenges with this is because a lot of those people in the F1 status or on OPT are really concerned about what their next steps are. Um, there have also been some conversations from the government where there's been some interest in even restricting those people on OPT from being employed and things like that. So this new fee that's going to be a major issue, and so the litigation is going to be a key part of this. So in essence, I think anyone on an F1 visa or looking at this OPT issue is they should really be focused on what's going to be the outcome of this litigation. We don't need to tell them to focus on that. I imagine they're already focusing on that. But but apart from that, you know, it will it will be a more normal type of a process if the $100,000 fee doesn't apply, and then we're just looking at this new framework that the government is proposing as far as the government prioritizing people at higher wage levels. And so, it's one of those things that in general, people need to be doing whatever they can to um, basically improve their employability, their ability to earn a high wage, and so that they can meet some of these other visa options.
So like my thought is that anyone who's outside the US and is like considering that they come to the US for like F1, like to study, like on an F1 visa.
Mhm.
A lot of people come here with the thought that they get the opportunity to work and maybe like work for a few years and then like maybe go back. Wouldn't those people be discouraged?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's really challenging to know, how it would affect people from, you know, the different backgrounds that people have, the different career fields they're in, and how that career field is providing opportunities in their home countries as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it, but certainly, it would be ideal to have an immigration system that does two things. One, encourages people to come into the United States for the opportunities that the country provides, while also still having a framework that protects U.S. workers. It's something that hopefully the government can find a balance between the two. We need immigrants in the country, and we also want to protect U.S. workers as well. So, yeah, it's one of those things that it's difficult to understand exactly how it'll impact a lot of people as far as their incentives to come. And, nobody wants to have to worry about uh, basically, if their end goal is to immigrate to the US and ultimately gain lawful permanent residency and then citizenship. The ideal immigration system lays out a pathway that they can reasonably see that makes sense, right?
Right, right, that makes sense. But just completely as a thought that I personally think that there's a lot of updates that need to come to this law, and it's like such a developing situation that I think there's going to be some nuance. Like if someone's coming to the US and they do want the opportunity to work on an OPT, there might be a thing. I think this is like a law that's going to target unfair immigration. And it's going to be like I've heard places like in India where like they're just like a lot of companies are just sending people through with the H-1B. I mean, there was a crackdown like a year back where there were multiple applications, so they had to tie it down to the passport number. So that completely shut down the applications to have. So they're trying to make it a fair system for like people to come legally and for the better of this country. And that's a fair way to look at it. So, do you think? Sorry, you want to say something?
Go ahead. Yeah. Um, I was probably going to go off on a tangent that you probably didn't,
No, no,
but
I want to hear the tangent
okay,
now.
so my tangent is really in essence when you look at the Immigration and Nationality Act. So, it's been on the books from the 1950s and onward, and there have been so many changes over time. And what usually ends up happening is some issue will come up to Congress. Something will be presented, and then a proposal made, and then it becomes law, and then the USCIS has authority to make regulations from that, and then that's how immigration laws evolve over time. And then you have the government making policy interpretations of those laws. And so it's a very dynamic system, because as you look at things over the years, there have a lot of times these very controversial issues will come up, and they impact immigrants and U.S. workers in a lot of different ways. And so but generally speaking, it's difficult to really understand how this impacts things overall. There's always reports being put out about how much immigrants help the economy of the United States, and then there's other reports that come out and say, well, in these ways, here's what we're finding about the wages for U.S. workers. And so it is just very complex, and it's almost like you need a whole team of economists to look at all the data and figure out, well, what is really going on. So anyway, that was much more of the tangent, but in other words, these immigration policies have really made a lot of changes over the years, and so in that way, these types of issues aren't new if you take that holistic approach. But at the same time, I think this is the first time we've seen something like, $100,000 fee that grabs your attention right away, right?
Definitely. I was like seeing it on a Friday, and I was just like, "What's happening?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's your thought of this training the talent on to like Canada or Europe, and like, are we seeing that shift already?
Well, yeah, I just I would like to see how this plays out a lot more. There's um yeah, I don't know that in essence, going back to what I was talking about earlier, even as you look at the possibility of economists looking at these types of issues, you look at um, e- even if we just take a step back and we look at businesses in general, businesses want to hire the best people. You could also even make uh, this comment about things that you purchase. Sometimes you buy something that's very expensive, and or maybe you buy something that's inexpensive and it breaks down, and someone says, well, why didn't you spend a little bit more money to get a higher quality item? Why this whole topic is so controversial is because we're talking about people's lives here, and we're talking about people who are taking a lot of risks. The people that come to the U.S. to study here, I can't imagine what it would take to go through all of these, um, jump through all these hoops and things to get here, and then you feel like you've got a pathway forward, and then all of a sudden these changes of the H-1B kind of take the wind out of your sails. We hear this phrase all the time, the American dream. Well, what is the American dream? The American dream is the chance people have to improve their lives, to start a business, to do all these amazing things that they have, and so in their future, and so when you talk about like the shifting from of talent from around the world, well, let's talk about what does it mean, talent. At what point is the talented people that are in get programs that are getting their PhD right now, or something like that? Are we going to really say, well, those people aren't providing value to the economy? Well, they're going to in a big way if they're not already. So in other words, this is a very long work a way around this topic, but I'll give it back to you, and you can ask some more follow-ups on.
No, that's fair. Like, it's like a whole game of micro and macroeconomics.
Yeah.
That is like someone who's like an economist can probably give us both a better idea. But yeah, what you said, like a lot of people, like including me, came to the US for like the American dream, where this is the land of freedom, this is the land where you have opportunities. And it does sound like a lot of it suddenly like there's like this air of fear where it's like, oh, maybe not, maybe this is changing. But again, it needs to play out in a certain way. Like I feel like there's a lot of trade negotiations that are also happening that could affect this. So again, like you said, and it's a wait and watch game. And but for someone like who's already on an H-1B, like it doesn't matter to them, is what my understanding is right now. They don't have to pay the fee. But someone who's like not on an H-1B, like an OPT or like even the J-1 visa or like other possible. What is like an alternative that they can have? Like I've heard of these things like the O1 visa, the EB1B visa. What are those?
Yeah, so great questions. And so the O1 is an extraordinary ability visa. It's a non-immigrant visa. Oftentimes people hear about the EB1A. That's also the extraordinary ability, but that's the petition with the I-140 petition that results in you getting a green card from that. And so that level is much more stringent. USCIS is much more open-minded. They approve the O1s at a much higher rate, even though the requirements are virtually the same. And so what you see with O1s is there's two themes that you have to show in the regulations. One that you have risen to the very top of your field, and the other is that you have sustained national or international acclaim. The regulations require that you meet 3 out of 10 requirements that go towards establishing that acclaim. Things like scholarly articles you've written, published material about you in major media or professional media, judging the work of others, high salary, things like that. Some of those go more towards showing you've risen to the top of your field. That's kind of what we're talking about with salary in general. But the acclaim aspects can be a lot more nuanced. And at the O1 level, you still have to establish these things, but it's just much easier than the EB1A. I will make a statement just generally about the J1s. One thing that can be complex with those is whether a person needs to have a 2 year basically waiting period where they return to their home country for 2 years before they can either um, change status to an H-1B visa or even apply for their green card. So, there are times when, as immigration attorneys, at least myself, sometimes I felt like a marriage counselor where I'd say, well, another option is marry a U.S. citizen. And how's your dating life going? I mean, those are the things that, or we cross over into that threshold. But yeah, that's kind of one thing that people can do is start preparing for an O1. And in that way, I would just say basically your goal is to become an expert in your field and let other people know about it. It's right with anything. We're trying to network with others. We're trying to get our names out there and establish ourselves as an expert. This is kind of taking it to that next level.
So is like you said, there's like multiple factors that go into deciding if someone's eligible for like an O1 or an EB1 or any of these extraordinary visas. There are 10 factors or 8 factors I'm given to understand. And is it so that they're like check boxes? Like no factor is more important than the other? Like if someone has like a really high salary, say $1 million, and in their field, and they have like publications and all of those things. So it's just a check mark. Like you cross the threshold and you just get that tick mark. It's not
Yes.
like you get extra points for that $1 million versus someone on like a 500K or something.
Right. Yeah. So, and this is where we go back to this part about the scales here, is that there are different ways that officers weigh them out. I had a supervisor that used to say, listen, if you meet the original contributions criterion, basically, in his view, you should get the EB1A. And that criterion, it's a difficult one to meet. So I kind of see where he's coming from, but for me also, as I adjudicated the EB1 cases, there are several criteria that aren't as strong in my view. So, judging the work of others, awards, memberships, um, there can be a wide variety of details or evidence that people have provided on those. So, but every case is different. Like this is why this case type is so challenging to understand, even from the perspective of, well, how do we explain why the approvals of these are going down? For example, is something that has just barely come out about EB1s. You know, every case type has a different level of showing this person has risen to the top of their field as far as the recognition in the industry. And so it is challenging, but this is one reason why we recommend people first, do some reading to understand about these case types, but then also have a conversation with an attorney and find out if they uh, are qualified or what they can do to qualify themselves for it.
Okay, and like, how does someone say someone has like this law gets passed and their company decides to tell them that, hey, we can't sponsor you. You can continue to work for with us on your OPT, or we might just lay you off or send you to a different country in a different office. But like, assuming the case of someone who's in the US and wants to get one of these visas, what's like a time frame and what's the way to prepare for such an application?
Great question, and it really depends on someone's background because a part of this case that goes toward the sustained a claim aspect. The officer is going to look at, well, what have you done over several years that shows that you're viewed as an expert in the field. And so sometimes, um, even if we would suggest that they do something like building up their portfolio more, if doing that in a 6 month period of time still has this, if most of their accomplishments have happened in 2025, the officer is going to be requesting evidence for, okay, well, what did you do before that? I will say USCIS has made some improvements over the years. Back when I worked for the government, it was rare for people that were kind of at the early stages of their career to qualify for an EB1. But now the government has put out a policy memo saying no, even people at the early stages can meet these requirements. Granted, they still have to meet the criteria to show uh, their expertise. So it's challenging. A lot of these uh, cases for engineers, for example. Sometimes USCIS officers take too stringent a view on looking at the scholarly articles they publish or the citations because they're used to comparing them to researchers that have a really high number of publications and citations. And so it really depends on the field that people are in and how the case is presented. But in essence, you really have to look at these different criteria. If somebody can be interviewed by a really prominent publication, that's a very positive aspect of their case. They can show they have a high salary. Those are ones that are much easier they're like open and shut cases. The judging ones, for example, those ones you can find a lot of ways to judge the work of others, but then you have to recognize that in the final merits analysis, the officer is going to say, okay, you've made it through our initial checklist. Now we're looking at the quality of your evidence. You've done judging twice. At, at this level, we just don't feel like that rises to the level of sustained national acclaim. So
Okay.
anyway, there's a lot of nuances with these, but it can be daunting for people to, especially to be thinking of going from an H-1B to a classification that requires showing that you've risen to the top of your field.
do people actually like go from an H-1B to like an O-1? My understanding is like H-1B is far more flexible. Like it's tied to your employer, but if you want to change your employer, it's easier to change it on H-1B versus like an O-1, you have to file a separate petition proving that you're eligible for the O-1 every time you change an employer.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. One of the things I would say with this is there's a lot of different variations for people on the H-1B program because if people have done it to that, if they've gone through twice or you've done 6 years on an H-1B program, if you have an I-140 petition filed, you can extend an additional year, basically infinite. N- Um,
Right.
just indefinitely until your green card application um, is approved. For people who are maybe on a first time H-1B, 2 years into it, I imagine that they would have a much harder time pivoting towards an O1 just because of the longevity of their work experience. It depends on what they did beforehand. But it's really a case by case scenario because sometimes people have really made very impressive contributions in their careers and then come over and furthered their education and then moved on from there to an H-1B visa. So it really depends, but there's really nothing that would prevent people from trying to transition one over the other. And sometimes people transition to even filing an EB2 NIW, National Interest Waiver case. But with those, there's still a backlog.
Can you explain that? The NIW?
Yeah, so the NIW, it's basically so when you look at both the H-1B program as well as what's known as the PERM program, which is basically where an employer will sponsor someone for a green card. In that program, they have to go through a labor certification process where the goal is to basically um, advertise for the position to ensure that U.S. workers aren't impacted by an immigrant receiving that of basically that position. And the what the national interest waiver does is it allows people to bypass the Department of Labor system where they can just self-petition demonstrating that they have a proposed endeavor that's in the national interest or has national importance for the country and that they show they are well positioned to advance that endeavor. So that can become an attractive thing in many ways, and it also gives people some freedom that they can say, okay, I could start my own business in this way. This is how it could create some jobs in the U.S. and impact the country in an important way. There's still a backlog in those, so it still takes a while for um, their priority date to become current. The wait time basically is
Right.
extended till they can obtain their green card, but that can also help those that are on H-1Bs uh, by having an I-140 that's approved. That allows them to extend their H-1B for those years.
Okay. That's interesting. I did not know about the NIW. And I've heard it in passing, and it
Yeah.
looks like something a lot of people are doing just to future proof like a lot of problems. But if I had to think of it, like what can international professionals do now to like future proof careers against like all these shifting policies? Would it be like a smart move to like get on the O1? And I'm given to understand that once you get an O1, since the requirements are pretty much the same for like an O1 and EB1, there's a lesser chance of you getting rejected while transitioning from O1 to EB1.
An O1 definitely does put you on a good trajectory towards an EB1, but the way officers view it is it's not really an open and shut case. So there are many times that people are disheartened by the fact that they applied for or they had the O1 and then when they applied for the EB-1A, it didn't pan out, and they were denied. There are some specific differences. Actually, I was just reading up on those the other day. We can chat about those. Like the in essence, it comes down to one word that was different in the way the regulations are put together for the EB-1As as far as the O-1As, and I almost think it was a mistake. Like they didn't intend for it to be that way. I can discuss that if you want the 30-second version of that. Um, yeah, in
Yeah, sure.
essence, okay, so the O1 regulations, the way the regulations for the EB1 are read, like if you read it just kind of scanning it through and not paying much attention to it, you would think that if you meet 3 out of the 10 of these requirements, that it's enough for you to be approved for the visa type. Well, there was a case out of California called Kazarian that laid out this now is what the framework is for EB1 cases that basically said, okay, there's this word in the regulation that it says initial evidence required. And so what the court did is they said, you want, our understanding of this is you have to meet these initial requirements, this initial evidentiary requirement to meet 3 out of the 10. And then we're going to do this final merits analysis to say, well, how, what do we think about it? So, in other words, what is the quality of the evidence sufficient to say, yes, this meets the framework of sustained a claim? But so when you see the regulations for the O, it just says document, evidence that you need to submit. It doesn't say initial evidence.
Oh,
And so just based on that one addition, and there's also a general unspoken viewpoint at the USCIS that, well, we're going to give more scrutiny to this EB1 petition because that gives you a green card. And you know what I mean? But there's nowhere in the regulations that says because this gives you a green card, we're going to hold you to a higher standard, right? So anyway, those are some just nuances.
yeah. I mean, I feel like this is the most interesting thing about law for me is that one word can really completely change the meaning of law.
Yeah, right.
And
Well, and at some point it may force me to, I don't know, consider litigating that issue, but we'll see.
I'll follow that. So, Evan, like, this is like a question that I wanted to conclude the podcast with. What is your prediction for like the future of skilled immigration in the US?
Well, it's a really good question. You know, the um, the administration, is uh, making it very clear about what their priorities are. Um, what I see is basically, um, you know, I, I I s- I recognize that a lot of people are concerned right now with what the future of immigration policies, in, entail, what this means for their future. What I would say is, I feel like if people can take a step back and even maybe do some research on the changes that have happened in immigration law from 20 years ago to 30 or 40 years ago, you don't have to go into a deep dive into it, but what what I'm seeing is that I don't think anybody should be out there saying, listen, the American dream is dead or that it's dying or anything. The thing that makes the American dream alive is that people have the dream. And so if the requirements have now become more difficult to follow that dream, or I would say then do what's necessary to establish yourself so that you can take part in that dream. And I'm not saying, I really don't have I'm not making a position one way or another as far as the government's priorities as versus the I see both sides of this and how it impacts uh, everybody. It's complex and and so what I would suggest is, if right now we're seeing that, the focus is for high skilled, highly paid people being put at kind of this higher pedestal to be able to come into the United States. Well, that's challenging for what that means for a lot of people. But what I would say is for everybody who's looking to immigrate to the US, I would say try to keep the dream alive in developing yourself, developing your skills, finding ways that this can actually be a challenge that forces you to rise to a higher level in your career. And, at the same time, I'd say my heart goes out to you for whatever changes this, means for you. But I would say just don't give up. Find a way to make your dreams become a reality. And I'll say this, just I am so inspired when I hear about the things that immigrants have done in their lives. Recently, I took an Uber to the airport and just heard the details of this person's life about how stressful it has been over the years as they've navigated this immigration world. And that's inspiring to me because of the dedication, the hope that these people have. And so I would just say keep a hope alive and try to find the best ways forward and hopefully things get easier before they get harder. But in essence, it will be hard to really tell how many immigrants are impacted, and certainly, uh, we don't want to become a country that shuts down from welcoming people to the country. So, anyway, we'll have to see how it all plays out, but. Yeah, I'm an optimistic person in general, and so uh, when I see challenges like this, I basically say, okay, you've got an uphill battle now. Let's talk about what you can do to climb that mountain,
That's really good advice, Evan. Thank you so much for doing this. I think there's a lot that I have personally learned about this new development in the whole immigration system. And I think the way you put it, the fact is that I don't think the American dream is dead. I think it just is pushing people to do like more. And let's see how this plays out.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Well, it's been
All right.
great chatting with you about this, and yeah, let me know if you have any other things you want to talk about at any point.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Evan.
Sure. Take care.